Hello, students. Welcome to my online review session, and this is part three of the review session for exam three. Where I'm going over chapter 8, the sensorimotor system. All right, let's continue. And then for the three principles of sensorimotor function, keep in mind that it's also in a hierarchical organization, association cortex at the highest level and muscles at the lowest level. And it also pertains a parallel structure. Signal flows between levels over multiple paths. And then also motor output is guided by sensory input and also learning changes in nature and the locus of sensory motor control. And then there are two major areas of sensory motor associations. You need to know the posterior parietal association cortex and a dorsolateral prefrontal association cortex. Each are composed of several different areas with different functions. Just highlight that. And then it is important to know that the posterior parietal association cortex, here's my side note, it is the area of convergence. This area is where you load your virtual reality, how your world is converged, and then damage is equals your world is going to be pretty much messed up. And then you need to read this section over here. So for stimulating posterior parietal association cortex, so you need to know that in low levels, it is the intent to perform actions. For higher levels, you feel as if they actually perform the action. And here's my little side note. And then you need to know these two disorders, apraxia and contralateral neglect. Apraxia is a disorder of voluntary movement, and then basically here's my side note. People with apraxia can pretend to do an action, for example, turning a doorknob, but they can do things habitually, such as actually open a door. So basically, damage is on the left side. Contralateral neglect is the inability to respond to stimuli contralateral to the side of the lesion, and it's usually seen with large lesions on the right. And here's my side note. And here's contralateral neglect, and here's an example. And then for the dorsolateral prefrontal association cortex, so basically it is the input from the posterior parietal cortex and an output to the secondary motor cortex, primary motor cortex, and the frontal eye field, and evaluates external stimuli and initiates voluntary reaction. It is supported by neural responses. So dorsolateral prefrontal association cortex is responsible for voluntary movement. It sends input from the secondary motor cortex. And in the secondary motor cortex, how is secondary motor cortex defined? You need to know this slide. And then here's my side note. And then for the secondary motor cortex, and then there are three subdominant motor areas, and there are two premotor areas, dorsal and ventral, and then there are three cingulate areas. So for an exam, you must know that it contains mirror neurons, and you need to know the hierarchy of motor neurons, and then you don't have to be you not be asked to identify these items, these parts individually. And then it is important that you know the mirror neurons. So basically, while it is active when performing an action or watching another person perform the same action. And then monkey studies were used as evidence. Mirror neurons fired while grasping or watching another grasp a particular object, but not the other objects. Grasping or watching another grasp grasp an object for a specific purpose, but not for another purpose. So this is a possible neural basis of social cognition, and it's likely found in humans. And then here's my side note: people with autism has decreased mirror neuron response and antisocial people. So and then here's the primary motor cortex, and here is my side notes. For an exam, you need to know that retinotopic means it pertains to visual, tonotopic pertains to audio, and somatotopic pertains to motor. And then here it says more cortex devoted to body parts that make complex movements. You need to know this slide as well. And for the primary motor cortex, it controls control of hand movements involve a network of widely distributed neurons, contrary to homunculus conception. And you need to know stereognosis as a recognizing by touch regards interplay of sensory and motor systems. And also found that new evidence shows that primary motor cortex neurons fires according to the target of movement, regardless of the starting point, rather than the direction of movement. And then it is important for us to know the cerebellum and the basal ganglia. It interacts with different levels of sensory motor hierarchy. And then keep in mind that cerebellum and basal ganglia are important for movement. And you need to know the cerebellum. And then what the cerebellum does is it makes sure the neural signals are correct. And you need to know the basal ganglia. And then here's my side note: Parkinson's disease equals lack of dopamine. So it's basically tremor at rest. Recall a video of the guy riding a bike from the video you saw today in class. And here are the four descending motor pathways. These are the things you really have to know for an exam. You need to know the two dorsolateral pathways, corticospinal and cortico-rubiospinal. You need to know the two ventromedial pathways, corticospinal and cortical brainstem spinal tract. And both corticospinal tracts are direct, and we have to memorize these. So I made this section over here, and then I did some bullet points. So for the dorsolateral tract, this is a dorsolateral tract. So we know that the dorsolateral tract equals, it is the dorsolateral, contralateral distal limbs, corticospinal, and then here's the side note. So for the dorsolateral corticospinal tract, most synapses on interneurons of spinal gray matter, and corticospinal descends through the medullary pyramids, then decusate. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly. And you need to know the bed cells, synapse on motor neurons projecting to leg muscles, and it controls wrist, hand, fingers, and toes. So for the dorsolateral cortico-rubiospinal tract, synapse at red nucleus and cross before the medulla, some control muscles of the face, and distal muscles of arms and legs. So for the ventromedial tracts, ventromedial, and then here's my side note. So for the ventromedial corticospinal tract, it descends ipsilaterally, axon branch and innervate interneuron circuits bilaterally in multiple spinal segments. For the ventromedial cortical brainstem spinal tract, it interacts with various brainstem structures and descends bilaterally, carrying information from both hemispheres. Synapse on interneurons of multiple spinal segments controlling proximal trunk and limb muscles. And then this slide summarizes the differences between the dorsolateral and the ventromedial pathways. And then also you need to know the central sensorimotor programs. You need to read this slide. And then you need to know the motor equivalence. And then also you need to understand the slide development of central sensory motor programs. And here's my side note. And you need to know response chunking and shifting controls at lower levels. And for this final slide, you need to understand the development of central sensory motor programs. And here is my side note. So for learning a new task, there's more brain activation than rote practice. So in your association areas, the posterior areas, with practice, there's a decrease in neuroactivity. So newly learned, high activation, well practiced, lower activation. In a dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, newly learned task, there's a high activity, well practiced, no activity. On the secondary cortex, it really depends on the task and whether secondary motor area is involved. And then for the primary motor slash sensory, newly learned is high activity. Well practice is high activity. Basically, when you're moving, it's always active. So in the last part, the cerebellum, newly learned, there's high activity. Well practiced, there's low activity. And I hope that this review session helps. Happy studying and good luck. I hope you do well on the exam.